All right. Okay, welcome back. Let's begin this, the last panel of today. The first presentation of this panel session is co-authored, actually, by Frédéric Lordon and Sandra Lucbert. Sandra Lucbert was not able to be with us today, but I think it is appropriate that I introduce her despite her absence. She's a professor and author of literature. Sandra Lucbert has published, for example, Personne ne sort les fusils with Seuil in 2020, Les ministères des comptes publics in 2021, Des faire voir, littérature politique in 2024. And then who is with us today is Frédéric Lordon. He's a philosopher and an economist, director of research at the Centre National de la Recherche Scientifique, CNRS. I should highlight some of his important and widely read works. He is the author of Capitalisme, Désir et Servitude, Marx et Spinoza, translated into English as Willing Slaves of Capital, Marx and Spinoza, with Verso in 2014. In 2015, he published Imperium, Structure et Affect des Corps Politiques, also translated into English and published with Verso in 2022 with the title Imperium, Structures and Affects of Political Bodies. He's the author of La Condition Anarchique, Affect et Institution de la Valeur, published with Seuil in 2018. He has more recently turned his attention to the question of communism in books such as Figures du Communisme, Figures of Communism, of 2021. And today he will present the paper co-written with Sandra Lucbert, titled The Lack, What Lack? The Negativity Issue from a Spinozist Psychoanalysis Viewpoint.
Thank you so much, Sibrand. Yes, as you have just said, Sandra Lucbert is very sorry not being with us today, so am I. Needless to say, all that I'm going to tell now belongs to her as well. Maybe this is going to be the exotic moment of the conference. I propose you to take one or two steps away from pure philosophy and to venture into other territories. Desire doesn't lack anything. We all know this famous Deleuzian statement, which almost resounds as a war cry, a Spinozian war cry, in essence, directed at psychoanalysis. Yet, Spinozism and psychoanalysis, so many obvious affinities, the radical critique of a substantial ego, the affirmation of causal determination over the illusions of free will, the dismissal of anything like a sovereign subject. So many affinities, so many friction points too, possibly blatant incompatibilities. For instance, is it possible to conceive something like an unconscious in Spinoza's work? At first sight, it seems not. A second sight could deliver another reply. Then comes the more serious issue of desire and lack, and the Deleuzian war cry. What I'm going to talk about now comes from a forthcoming book co-authored by Sandra Lucbert and me. This book is not meant, as you could expect, to discuss the relationships between Spinozism and psychoanalysis. It intends rather to propose a complete reconstruction of psychoanalytical theory on a Spinozist basis, put otherwise, to propose a full-fledged Spinozist psychoanalysis theory. Yes, it was rather ambitious. We had then to rebuild, albeit in Spinozian terms, all the fundamental concepts of Freud and Lacan: drive, enjoyment, repression, unconscious, foreclosure, the other, the great other, the symbolic, you name it. It turned out that the Spinozian backup was of considerable help to fix the shortcomings, the inconsistencies, or sometimes the blatant flaws raised by Freudian and Lacanian concepts in their current state. Prominent among them is the issue of lack. Back to Deleuze, desire doesn't lack anything. Then to Lacan, the lack is the engine of desire. It seems we have there a clear-cut divide and something like a watershed between Spinozism and psychoanalysis. Is that so? Does building a Spinozist psychoanalysis require here to make an exclusive call? At the risk of being inconsistent, either not seriously Spinozist or not up to Freud and Lacan's legacy. Our point is that, as such, this is a misstated problem, which has to be reformulated so as to be properly addressed, which in turn requires to go back to fundamental concepts: conatus, drive, desire. It is almost trivial to say that Freud's conceptual building is something of a monument, yet he has definitely been a clinician more than a theorist. Foundational base work, systematic consistency were not his primary concerns. The core concept of the entire psychoanalysis comes out as an intuition and is stated as a mere postulate. There is the drive. Furthermore, it is said to be sexual in nature with no other justification. No further elaboration in the psychoanalytical field has ever seriously discussed these twin postulates and felt in need of any further digging. Here comes Spinoza's philosophy, which definitely helps digging deeper. When it comes to the animating force within the human being, that is to say, with the human mode, and actually within every mode, we have to go back to God, sive natura. What sets every mode in motion is the infinite power of nature, as stated by Ethics 125 Corollary. And the conatus is nothing but the essence and the degree of power of the mode, which stems from this expression relationship between the mode and the substance. Laurent Bove is used to present the conatus as, quote unquote, an objectless desire, a desire without any object. Although very telling and emphasizing quite an important point, I believe the formulation is a little inaccurate. Rigorously speaking, desire can hardly be conceived without an object, as indicated by definition 1 of the affects, quote, desire is man's very essence, insofar as it is conceived to be determined from any given affection of it to do something, unquote. The intermediary term of a given affection is necessary to bridge the gap between conatus and desire. By this affection, and by this affection only, an object comes to the conatus, turning it into a desire, determining it as a desire. One could thus say that the conatus is nothing but a speculative concept, and by that I mean a concept which has no empirical counterpart. One cannot observe the conatus as such. The only thing one can observe are the concrete desires going after concrete and determined objects. That would be, in a nutshell, the purely Spinozist view on the articulation of conatus and desire. Does psychoanalysis have something to say at that point? I said earlier that Spinoza's concepts help fix some flaws of the psychoanalytical theory. It is now time to add that psychoanalysis too, in return, helps to shed some light on some blind spots of Spinozism. For instance, I was referring to the given affection mentioned by the definition 1 of the affects. One of those given affections, which should definitely come to our mind, which, by the way, is absolutely central to the psychoanalytical thinking, and to which Spinozism gave so little attention, if any, is this: we were all born. And that was no small event. Ushering all of a sudden into aerial life, that's a heck of an affection, isn't it? Yes, it is. Far-reaching consequences follow. Far-reaching indeed, because the singularity and the magnitude of this affection will leave definitive traces in the body of the mode for the rest of his life. But let's proceed in the due order. Speaking of singularity about the affection of birth was no metaphor. In mathematics, singularity indicates a discontinuity. The discontinuity entailed by the birth could hardly be greater in a human life. It separates two dramatically different regimes of affections. On one hand, the in utero regime, with its characteristic affections, homeostasis, quietness, self-sufficiency, true the latter being utterly imaginary, yet in a way experienced as such by the fetus. Half joking, We could almost say that where he provided with the ID, the fetus could claim being an infinite mode, minimally understood as a mode who does not depend, although living in the utmost dependency, but of that he has no ID. Being a mode who does not depend, so sweet an imagination, yet a long shot. Come the moment of the birth, terrible swing from an extreme to its opposite, and the sense of self-sufficiency is annihilated within the wink of an eye. The soft quietness suddenly snaps into a terrible precariousness, a condition of total functional impotence and distress. Unlike the animals, the human mode comes to the world in a state of very grave prematuration, unfinished, radically unable then to persevere by its own means, doomed to die if some external rescue doesn't kick in immediately. Freud names Hilflosigkeit, this state of extreme dependency and distress, whereby homeostasis has been completely blown away and turned into full-scale insecurity and hardship, with death lurking everywhere. Thank God, these terrifying moments will be erased from our conscious memories. The singularity of birth in a nutshell, then, from imagining oneself as the infinite mode to being the most miserable finite mode. Could you ever conceive a more dramatic loss? Now, I have just dropped the decisive word, loss. Through the birth, something has been lost, something big. But what? No one knows. No one will ever know. Because what has been lost precedes any signifier and will remain forever beyond any linguistic reach. From the finite understanding of the mode, the object of this loss, if calling it an object is appropriate, is totally opaque, impenetrable, therefore elusive. And all the more so that the experience of this loss being absolutely universal, no one can tell no one can teach no one about it. Everyone thus is taken by a tremendous sense of loss, therefore by a sad affect, well identified and named by Spinoza, regret. Edwin Curley translates by longing. Spinoza himself says desiderium. Ethics 336 scholium. This sadness, insofar as it concerns the absence of what we love, is called longing, desiderium. When he was inside, the mode had no sense of lack due to the homeostatic continuity of the feed. Birth is the most brutal discovery of what lacking is, of what desiderium is. This inaugural desiderium, the mother of all desideria, if you will, we call it the princeps desiderium. And we can already anticipate that this event, this singularity, will leave its imprint on the entire life of the human mode, more than an imprint, actually. It will decisively shape the psychic structure of the mode. On the other hand, we know by Ethic 313 scholium that, quote, one who loves necessarily strives to have present and preserve the thing he loves, unquote. The reactional move of the conatus to desiderium is then to strive so as to recover the object of the desiderium. Well, in the present case, easier said than done, precisely because no one has the slightest idea of what this object is. Besides, is it really, and in the proper sense of the word, an object? No, it's not. What the princeps desiderium is about, what has been lost, has rather the nature of an experience, what it was like being inside. Again, the experience of continuous feed and self-sufficiency. Lewis Carroll has a marvelous idea to be borrowed when it comes to naming the thing that everyone hunts, not knowing what it is. He calls it the snark. Let me quote. He would answer to hi or to any loud cry, such as fry me or fritter my wig, to what you may call or what was his name, but especially thingamajig. In a less spiritual manner, the object which is not an object of the princeps desiderium, we call it the object 0. Throughout the birth, the mode has lost the object 0, and now he wants it back, and thrusts accordingly. Yet, in a quest doomed to fail because he doesn't know what it is, then has no chance to ever find it. 3 things then have to be underscored. Number 1, the striving to recover the lost object 0, the striving directed at the object 0, regardless of its fuzziness, is a first determination of the post-birth conatus. Let's go back to the definition 1 of the affects. By the affection of birth and the following affect of desiderium, the essence of the mode has been affected in a way which determines it to do something, recover the object 0. We can thus say that the essence of the mode has been determined as a desire, the desire for the object 0. The desire for the object 0, that's our Spinozist definition of the drive. This Spinozist definition of the drive exhibits the same features which are very central to Freud's drive. A relentless, unabated striving which never gives up and will only cease with the death of the individual. In Freud's view, one cannot suspend the drive, so intimately linked it is with the mere existence of the individual. Exactly in the same way as the conatus being the essence of the mode, getting rid of it or putting it on pause is a sheer absurdity. A common feature of both views on the drive is also that it can be considered as a free energy, an untied energy, which will later get tied into various objects, even more, that can possibly get tied to any object, which is likely to be tied to any object. Freud noticed that no object, even the weirdest, is stranger to the drive, which is also made perfectly clear in Ethics 3:15. Anything can be the accidental cause of joy, sadness, or desire. On the other hand, you immediately see the differences between the Freudian and the Spinozian drive. 2 main differences. First, the drive in our framework is not postulated. It is derived, which is the advantage of being backed up by a whole ontology. It is derived from the infinite power of nature, then from the modal conatus as an expression of this power, then the affection of the birth, then the affect of the princeps desiderium as a result of this affection, then the reactional striving to recover the object of the princeps desiderium. Second difference, there is nothing sexual in essence in the drive, as you can see along the determination process I have just unfolded. Yet, if unsexual in essence, the drive will be almost immediately sexualized. So close to the natal catastrophe, the tactile care, which leaves from the Hilflosigkeit, in other words, which literally saved from the death, is charged with so high affective intensities that the entire body of the little mode is erogenized. Number 2, I said earlier that with loss, the decisive word had been dropped. Decisive insofar as it seemingly takes just one step to pass from loss to lack. Can we jump to the conclusion? Not so fast. Actually, none of this cancels what Spinoza says about deprivation, for instance, in the earlier quoted letter 21 to Blyenberg, quoted by Jane. Privation is nothing in itself. It is nothing else than denying of a thing something we think belongs to its nature, unquote. Something we think belongs to its nature. One could not emphasize more that the idea of privation is a sheer product of imagination, a product of the knowledge of the first kind. As the ideas of loss, desiderium, and lack are purely imaginary, there are no objection whatsoever to the adequate idea that lack has no positive content of any sort. Deleuze's war cry was absolutely true, ontologically true, by reality and perfection. We understand the same thing. Reality does lack nothing, and so does the human desire. Yet the mode himself considers things otherwise. if it is from the finite understanding standpoint. What matters to him, what his mind is filled with, is plugging the gap of the loss. Something is missing, something too important to be renounced, to be left away, which has imperatively to be retrieved. What the mind is occupied with is the idea of this thing, whatever indeterminate, this thing now placed before the mode, whose endeavor is directed at. With the loss of the object zero, the princeps desiderium and the turn taken by the striving to recover the object zero appears the main feature of any further object of desire. It is viewed as lying ahead of the mode, before the mode, which the German language perfectly captures when it says Gegenstand, what stands in front of the mode, what stands before. And the sheer etymology of object as well, what is thrown before. Hence, the necessary imagination of desire as the quest for something that pre-exists and lies ahead. By this imaginary production, desire undergoes what could be called a teleological catastrophe, in the very etymological sense of catastrophe, an event which turns things upside down. Whereas the desire is really ontologically pushed from behind, the causal determination process, practically and imaginarily, it feels pulled from before. By this catastrophic reversal, the desire then ushers into what will be from now on and forever its imaginary regime, a regime of teleology, and it does necessarily so by the same necessity that the mode sees the sun standing 200 feet away. In the end, then, lack or not lack. If there is a lack to be spotted in psychoanalysis, I would say that it is the lack of a Spinozist ontology view on the lack, on the desire, which explains why psychoanalysis took the idea of lack for granted, why it took it so seriously. It took it seriously because it had no possibility, no conceptual resource to realize that the idea of lack is an imaginary production, albeit in the Spinozian sense of the imaginary, which is quite different from Lacan's in his famous trinity of the real, the symbolic, and the imaginary. As a matter of fact, imaginary productions, Spinoza says, are genuine parts of the reality. Imagination is real because it is necessary. The imaginary is a real element of the human life as it is, which compels both to acknowledge the presence of the lack, then its effects, and not to ratify its claims, but to give it its proper status. Psychoanalysis only had the first point right, but missed the second. And the other way around for Deleuze and Guattari, who went so far in discarding any thinking in terms of lack that they missed the reality of its presence and of its effects. These are the two symmetrical mistakes about the lack. And that's why we should recognize at the same time that psychoanalysis was relevant in emphasizing the lack at the core of the human existence, and that it was wrong in unduly ontologizing it. This laying stance is nowhere more visible than in Lacan thinking, and all the more so that as a reader of Spinoza, Lacan first said, quote, that the real doesn't lack anything, a perfect Spinozian statement. Nonetheless, step by step, he will put so much emphasis on the lack that he will eventually turn it into a quasi-ontological feature of the desire. The lack, he will say, is the engine of the desire. Even more, quote, the lack is the cause of the desire, unquote. This new view culminates in his theory of anxiety. Anxiety comes, he says, when the individual lacks the lack. Anxiety is the effect of the absence of the lack, which leaves the individual in an abolic state, a state of no desire. That the lack is the engine or the cause of the desire, this is unacceptable to a consistent Spinozist view. In the end, the engine of the desire is the conatus, itself stemming from the infinite power of nature. As to the cause of the desire, it is always to be found in the affections of the mode, the affects that have followed, and the reactional reorientation of the conative striving that has been thereby determined. Again, the desire is not pulled from before, it is pushed from behind. As the Scholium of Ethics 3.9 reminds it, quote, "It is clear that we neither strive for, nor will, neither want, nor desire anything because we judge it to be good. On the contrary, we judge something to be good because we strive for it, will it, want it, and desire it," unquote. Of course, none of this prevents the imagination to prevail in the human mind, and the imaginary productions about desire to become part of the reality. This imaginary regime of desire, as it becomes part of the reality, is somewhat recalled by Ethic 3.2 Scholium, quote, "We can do nothing from a decision of the mind unless we recollect it," unquote. Put otherwise, we cannot, from a decision of the mind, desire anything we have not previously yearned for. All the controversy about lack and negativity thus revolves around a confusion between ontological and ontic considerations. From the Spinozian ontological standpoint, it is clear that no negativity whatsoever can be found in the human desire. The immanence is flawless, reality and perfection are the same. The birth, the princeps desiderium, the striving to recover the object zero, all this is perfectly, positively determined to unfold. No negativity at all should be seen in this entirely positive process, provided we form an adequate idea about it. Nevertheless, one would miss a big part of the story, not seeing that although by a trick of the imagination, the lack settles at the very core of the human existence, and really so, necessarily so. It would then be faulty and would deliver a truncated view on the desire, not to take that necessity into account and just discard the lack as an inadequate idea. Even if imaginary, one had thus to acknowledge the prominent place of the negativity, the lived experience of the negativity within the human life. Which leads me to my third, final, and conclusive point. A prominent place, have I just said, and it is almost an understatement. The truth is that the experience of the birth and of the princeps desiderium could not be overestimated. The first thing to be said is that the psychoanalytical emphasis on the singularity of birth leads to a more complete view on desire. The Spinozian view jumped directly from conatus to desire. Psychoanalysis inserts a third, an intermediary term, the drive, defined as a sort of predetermination of the conatus at the quest for the object zero. And because, at least in the Spinozian grammar, predetermination is itself a fuzzy and possibly flawed concept, we should rather say that the drive is, as always, the perfect determination of the conatus as a desire, but the desire of a fuzzy object, the undefinable and unknowable object zero, the snark. That the peculiar object of this peculiar desire that is a drive remains unknowable doesn't prevent the conative power to do something. It has necessarily to be so because it is not within the modal power to suspend itself. To do something then, but what? What to hunt, what to pursue, when you don't have the slightest idea of what to hunt and what to pursue? Here begins the great story of the human life, the subrogation game. Do you imperiously pursue something you have no clue about? You will simply put another object, a subrogate object, in the place of the object zero. And this pursuit, now directed at a defined object, you can call it a desire in the very usual sense and in the Spinozian sense as well. Not paying attention to the singular catastrophe of the birth, unfortunately led Spinozism to ignore the intermediary step of the determination of the conatus as the drive before being determined as a desire, if we consider that, in its proper sense, desire has to do with fully determined, specific, and well-identified objects. This means that the presence of the princeps desiderium, of the princeps lac, will be pervasive into every specific, concrete desire, because through the subrogation relationship, every concrete desire echoes the primal desire that was the desire for the object zero. And it helps also understand why every desiring quest, even if successful, and I should rather say even more if successful, is doomed to be frustrating and to leave the mode in a chronic state of insatisfaction. I can't get no, once sang a famous rock band, but I try. Hopelessly, I'm afraid. Hopelessly, because what is gotten when desire succeeds is not the thing which was pursued in the first place. You always get a subrogate only, and the insatisfaction only leads to restart the pursuit, to try again, with no other perspective than to fail again in an endless repetition. Now you get why the object of the princeps desiderium, we name it the object zero. Because as in mathematics, where zero is the liminar number which starts the infinite series of all natural numbers, the object zero is the liminar object which initiates the indefinite series of all the concrete specific objects the desire will strive for. Think of Citizen Kane, locked in Xanadu, who amasses all that can possibly be amassed, and will die with the mystery unsolved of what he was really coveting, an enigma enshrined in a snow globe with the sole indication of a non-signifying, useless signifier, rosebud. Thank you for your time and attention.